Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sales Think Tank, where we invite sales leaders to focus their expertise on the issues at the top of the agenda for every organization. My name is Rebecca Schnaufer, and I lead the Sales Solutions business for the UK and Ireland, and I'll be the host of today's episode. Before we get started, I'm going to be going over some housekeeping items. Firstly, audio is only available through voice over IP by audio broadcast. There is no dial-in. We will be sending out a recording, however, within the week after the broadcast. Secondly, if you're experiencing any audio issues, please refresh your browser. For the best viewing experience, we recommend you use Google Chrome or Firefox. Thirdly, you'll notice that there are some resources in the resource module to the right of the media player. Please download any of the materials available in that panel. And finally, we have team members available on the Q&A panel to answer any questions you may have. So now I hope you enjoy the webinar. So on to today. In this episode, we're exploring one of the big challenges of the remote selling era, and one with big implications for any sales team's ability to hit their targets this year. How do you surface new opportunities and build pipeline when you no longer have in-person contacts to help build relationships and move things forward? Since the arrival of the pandemic, sales organizations have focused a lot of attention on supporting customers and strengthening their existing relationships. This has been invaluable for protecting revenues and identifying and responding to new opportunities. For many organizations, it's really helped keep the pipeline moving. However, there's another challenge that we face as sales leaders, and one that's becoming increasingly pressing the further we move into the era of remote selling, which is how do we initiate new relationships, identify the right opportunities, and engage buyers remotely who have no previous experience of us? What is our game plan for building future pipeline? This feels like a hugely important issue for the future of selling, so I am very grateful to have such an expert panel here with me to discuss it. To kick things off, I'm going to ask our panelists to do a quick round of introductions, starting with you, Natalie.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Patnaik. I lead the Sales Navigator product team at LinkedIn as part of the LinkedIn Sales Solutions business unit. Really excited to be here and join you all from San Francisco.
Welcome, Natalie. I'm now going to pass to you, Morgan.
I'm Morgan Ingram. I work at JB Sales Training, and typically on a day-to-day basis, I'm training clients at high-growth SaaS companies like Snowflake, Salesforce, Google, etc., and helping them break through the noise with prospecting techniques. So excited to be here.
Excited for you to be here too, Morgan. Thank you very much. And then finally, we are going to pass across to Declan.
Thanks, Becky. So Declan Kenny is my name. I'm Vice President of Demand Generation for Oracle in EMEA, working in the SaaS space. So delighted to be here today.
Welcome, all of you. I'm going to dive straight in. First and foremost, acquiring opportunities and engaging buyers starts with identifying the right opportunities to focus on. Declan, I'm interested. Has your sales team's approach to identifying opportunities changed?
Yeah, it certainly has changed. I mean, we have, I would think, become more data-driven. And the reason being is, we all know face-to-face meetings have dropped off. And also the ability to phone customers up directly has also been a challenge, as everyone now is working from home and, mobile numbers aren't as accessible. So that has definitely moved us more to a more digital approach. But also, even when it comes to digital, customers are also getting a lot of saturation over social and email. So actually, as Morgan mentioned earlier, it's now your message needs to be really high value, to what Morgan said, to cut through the noise. All right. So you kind of have to get really good now at segmenting who the right customers you want to approach. That's kind of really important, as you mentioned, for that new business. So I actually find myself working a lot more with marketing operations and business operations to really identify within the data set who we should be approaching. So, as I said, we've become more data driven. And what that means is I'm looking at machine learning models, intent models, looking at research tools like such as Sales Navigator, Data Fox, and figuring out, looking at all this data, what do we need to look for in terms of which customers to approach once we find the right data and signals that are coming from them. So yeah, we're trying to get a lot more smart, I suppose, in our approach because of the challenges we're facing with less face-to-face and less phone-based activity. So yeah, our approach certainly is evolving for sure, Becky.
Thanks, Declan. It sounds like you're really putting more emphasis on researching your buyers before actually reaching out. I'm interested, Natalie, how much of the start of the sales process has changed, do you think?
Yeah, this is really interesting that Declan brought up data. This is something that we have observed as well in polling our customers. One of the recent surveys we did, 80% of decision makers said that they're really unlikely to engage with sales professionals who lack an understanding of their business and their pain points. So it's really more important than ever to research your customers and understand them before you start reaching out. One of our newest products, LinkedIn Sales Insights, is really leaning into this data-driven approach. It's a way for sales teams to get a real-time view using all of the LinkedIn available data around account growth, around territories and regions that are growing, both in terms of headcount as well as revenue, and use that to prioritize their accounts and even analyze their salespeople's relationships strength with target accounts and help that in terms of like book building. So really exciting things going on there on the data-driven side. Of course, within Sales Navigator for reps themselves, we have recently introduced the account map feature on your account pages, which lets you map out your key stakeholders at an account in sort of like an org structure view, so you can spot any potential gaps you have in your buying committee and start to sort of build out those relationships. So.
Thank you, Natalie. So I'm hearing a real sort of deep dive into research up front, more of a reliance on data and planning at the very outset before you even begin to think about selling. Morgan, are you seeing the same? Are you seeing more emphasis being put on researching the buyer needs before they reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to actually go back to a point that Declan talked about with marketing and ops. I think that's extremely important right now for you as a sales rep and as a sales leader to go look in your CRM and see in the past year who was even buying, right? Because that's a whole different landscape than it was 2 years ago. So I always tell people, go inside the CRM, see who the buyers were, see who the industry was, how long did the sales cycle take? How did you even get in front of that person, right? And you have to have a multi-touch approach to do that, right? You can't just do email. You can't just be like, well, we used to do it in person and now we can't do it anymore. It's like, you got to switch it up. So what I would say is you have to be more thoughtful in how you reach out, because, you know, I would love to hear from you all on this as well as leaders. You probably get a lot of emails, you get a lot of in-mails, right? And they probably aren't personalized. And if I ask you how many personalized messages you get, it's going to be a very, very low number. So just that extra effort of adding context and being thoughtful is the way to stand out in the market right now. And the reps that are the most successful are taking time, 45 minutes, an hour a day, to be thoughtful. And how they do that is they're going on LinkedIn and finding people that are posting certain things. They're using Sales Navigator to see, okay, do they even follow our company, right? Have they worked at a company that we've had business with in the past? This is extra effort, but the more thoughtful that you are and you show them that you know them, the more success you'll have as well.
That's great. So being thoughtful, being mindful, doing your preparation, and really seeking to understand how you can add value to your potential customer is something that teams are leaning into more and more. Thinking about the circumstances of the sales teams, those have changed pretty dramatically over the past year, but also the buyers. Our buyers have entered into a completely new reality too. So I think you need to think about how this changes the way that we do the initial outreach. For example, do we need to approach our first contact with a customer differently? Morgan, your team, are they finding it harder, or are they finding it easier to get that first meeting? And do you think that response rates have changed with the switch to remote working?
Yeah, so it's definitely an obstacle because you're dealing with a scenario where the volume of email sends have actually gone up. I'll actually point to that one channel first. You can go look at the HubSpot data, and it actually says that there's been 3 or even 4 times X more sales email sends, but the response rates have gone down. Even in the last month, it's at a negative 30%. Now, some of you may hear that and you're like, oh, well, I guess I shouldn't send emails anymore. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just letting you know, like, that's what the data says. So my recommendation with clients that we work with and even people that we work with on our team is, if you want to get more people and engage with you and you want to build pipeline, the very first step that I recommend is actually doing a LinkedIn connection request, right? So then they can put a face to the name and know who you are, because there's so much automation and there's so many emails that you get sent. If you at least recognize the name by a connection request that you sent, that should be able to help you there as well. So my recommendation is your first touch should be a LinkedIn connection request. So at least they can know who you are. Then send an email to warm that up. Then send a call. Then you can send that video. But again, it's all about using everything to create these different touches so you can get in front of the person. It is an obstacle, right? Because there's more people sending out messages. There's more going on in the digital world. However, what I will say, if you use all of the touches, you're going to stand out, because most people don't.
Thank you. So I think you're suggesting a multifaceted approach, sort of one that you build on each step as you go. Declan, taking what Morgan has said, how do your teams signal when they've got value to add, when they reach out remotely? And over the last month or year or so, have you updated your methodologies at all?
Yeah, let me maybe take it from where Morgan left. So let's just say we've engaged with a customer and they want to have a meeting, right? Which is always a good sign. And I would probably coin the phrase, in tech, we sometimes call it a discovery call. I think the customer actually calls it a credibility call, right? Have you got the credibility really to hold the conversation and to engage me? And what you find in enterprise software sales, especially in the cloud side, it's team-based selling. So there's a team on the vendor side for us in Oracle, and there's a team on the customer side. So one thing we've changed is, a lot of the sales reps may be young in their emerging careers, and they may not have the credibility. So if you're reaching out to the head of logistics and that person replies saying, yes, let's talk next Tuesday, my view is, well, look to the ecosystem around you that's in your group and say, well, I got a supply chain expert who's based in the UK who can come onto this Zoom call and add real credibility to the call. So that early high value discovery call or getting past the credibility test is really important. Okay. And that kind of every interaction counts, and don't underestimate that first interaction. Okay. And then the second thing is the follow-up from that. So the customer says, okay, they've got credibility. They had a great supply chain conversation, but have they really done it before? Then you're kind of following up with a customer story. By the way, here's what we've done it for a customer like you in your industry. And then the third one is, when you're talking to maybe a business leader, the head of logistics, don't forget either, you've got to talk to maybe and reach out to the CFO and CTO, because what we're finding is they facilitate a lot of the selling. So they're great facilitators, and you get there early and go, I spoke to your head of logistics. I know you're the CFO. I know you're under a lot of cost constraints, or I know you're the CTO and you've been asked to integrate a lot of different pieces of technology. How can we help? So it's about selling also to and adding value, I suppose, not just to the head of the business, but to those key facilitators, the CFO and CTO. So for me, it's suppose, Becky, it's that credibility call, then reinforcing it with customer stories of proof you've done it, and then also working with other stakeholders like CFOs and CTOs outside of your typical business leader position.
Yeah, that's great. I really, really like that credibility call. And I think approaching it in that way really does tee you up to consider the value that you can add. Also, that multi-threading approach. We've seen the stats that talk about how many people now sit in the buying circle that have influence over what a company chooses to spend their money on. I think even more so when we're dealing with customers remotely, getting everything lined up and really making sure that you've leaned into all those influencers and decision makers, that's incredibly important. And taking the value to each one of those, that value doesn't always have to be the same message. You tailor it to the audience, whether it's CFOs, CTOs. So thank you, Declan. Natalie, I'm interested in understanding your thoughts on whether there are different factors that are influencing a buyer's decision to engage in the current climate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Morgan mentioned the HubSpot numbers, and we've seen that as well in survey data and just in our own email response rate and other numbers. I mean, there's just like this growing divide between, you know, what buyers perceive happening in the market and what sellers are doing. Really due to COVID. I mean, the virtual outreach has just exploded from the seller side, and buyers are just overwhelmed. And so response rates are like lower than ever. Again, this is not to say that you shouldn't reach out. Absolutely you should, but the tactics need to change. And one of the best ways to really reach out, I think Morgan mentioned this, is through LinkedIn, but especially through warm introductions. So, you know, things like Team Link, for example, in Sales Navigator, which lets you use your colleagues, your coworkers network to reach out to prospects and customers. And that's has significantly higher, obviously, response rates because it's coming from a person familiar to the buyer, as well as even just like building engagement on LinkedIn.com. So not necessarily even just reaching out with a connection request, absolutely, but even things like engaging with the buyer's content on LinkedIn, you know, commenting on their posts, participating in events that they participate in. A lot of this actually leads to building that sort of trust relationship and credibility. And we've seen salespeople who take that sort of extra step and go that extra mile have significantly higher, you know, win rates and successful sales outcomes. So yeah, I definitely think that both on the buyer side as well as on the seller side, the tactics need to change. And so what we consider outreach really needs to expand beyond just like the cold email and phone call. So.
Absolutely. It's the layered approach, isn't it? And not thinking that there's just one straight line through to getting a sale. Approaching your customers holistically in that multifaceted way really does enable you to understand them better and to drive a value that's unique to them. Declan, I'd like to switch back now to your credibility.
Okay.
I'm so sold.
I wrote it down too. I was like, oh, that's a good nugget right there.
Yeah.
Are you finding those discovery or credibility meetings, you're finding they're different to what they used to be?
When you say different, I think they are if you have the right people matching up on your side and the customer side. And one thing you'll find is the difference in the length of the calls. So you may not actually be having, you know, as many calls as we've got to challenge right now, but when you add and layer in with more credibility, we've had calls going on for an hour or two, which generally didn't happen. It was maybe 15 minutes and then I'll organize a demo and everything was quite rushed. Now with the credibility call, you're getting a lot meatier conversations. And I suppose it's also about building, you know, that trust, right? And once they are hearing you and you're listening to them and you've got the right, you know, credibility on your side, definitely they are changing. We may not be getting as many, but they're also getting longer, but more senior, meaning you're getting more C-level people coming to this call because you've sold it as, hey, listen, come and talk to us. We've got a bit more credibility and a bit more firepower to give you an understanding of what's happening in your industry.
That's pretty powerful, actually. Depth and breadth. That's what's really making the difference. So Morgan, based on what Declan has said, I'm really interested to understand what tactics you would say are proving to be most effective for reaching out remotely. You touched on a few, but kind of interested in hearing about the whole portfolio.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm still fired up about the credibility call because it because it aligns with something that I also say as well, because in order to really secure the deal, right, we also have to have what I call deal insurance, right? Because we have car insurance, you got rental insurance, and then we sometimes just forget about deal insurance, which is we have to have multiple people. And so the key there is how do we reach out to people to get in front of them? You know, I mentioned a couple, but one thing that I've been very adamant about as of late is understanding the skill set of delivering videos throughout your sales cycle. And that's in prospecting and that's also in sales cycle. So I'll talk about both. So video prospecting is something that you could start leveraging because it's going to be something that's going to stand out. And you could do that through the LinkedIn Messenger. You could do that in InMail, and also not InMail, but email. And the real key here at the end of the day is that you're not trying to create a movie picture, because I think people mess that up. They create like 3, 4, 5 minute long videos and like, I'm not going to watch that. But what you will watch is what we like to call a movie trailer video. Because at the end of the day, my whole goal in reaching out to someone to get to that credibility call is to spark their interest. And if you watch a movie trailer, the whole goal of that is to spark your interest to actually go watch the movie. And so typically what we'll tell clients is that we want them to focus on a 45 to 60-second video and reach out with a reason, have your value prop intact, have a call to action that's crisp so that they're willing to take that meeting. So that's one way that we've seen a lot of people stand out right now, is leveraging all the things that Natalie just talked about in Sales Navigator, and then leveraging that in video so you come with a purpose and an insight and not just, hey, I made a video, what's up? It's very purposeful and intentional. And in the sales cycle, my last point here is, how do you continuously get all of these people in the sales cycle? One of the things you could do is you could follow up with video. And that way, that video can get sent to other people that you probably have to go talk to at some point. And the difference is that obviously they could forward the email that you wrote out, but if they see your face, they hear your voice, it's the closest thing we have right now to a face-to-face meeting. So if I see you and I hear you, I'm probably a little bit more bought in to meet with you versus if I see a written out email that talks about the recap of the conversation you had with my colleague. So those are ways that you can start standing out right now, is practicing your video skills, because people are at home. So they do have a little bit more time to watch the videos versus when people are commuting, on flights and things of that nature.
Yes, absolutely. So summarizing there, we've got research, we've got the credibility piece, we have customer value, and we've got differentiation. So there's a whole bunch of things in there that sellers can lean into even more than before to really, really enable them to build up relationships with their customers remotely. So taking that to the next level, in our annual State of Sales survey, trust in relationships is consistently picked out by salespeople as the most important factor in helping them to close out deals. How does the process of building that trust change when your sales team has never had the opportunity to meet buyers in person? Morgan, I'm going to pivot to you first. Is it harder, do you think, to become a trusted advisor without meeting face-to-face?
It's still possible. At the end of the day, the face-to-face meeting is going to be the most powerful meeting, right? You could feel the energy, you're with that person. So obviously you're losing that, sure. But Zoom and things of this nature still help you to build that credibility. Now, when you get on that, we're just going to call it the credibility call. You need to trademark that, Declan, by the way. You need to trademark that. Yeah. But once you get on the call, right? What happens on most calls, and again, for the leaders here, a rep pops on the call and they're like, hey, how's the weather? And you're like, this call is going to be awful, right? You're like, I already know this call is going to suck, right? You start checking your email, like, I got to get out of here. So the way to start off a call to show that you are a trusted advisor and to get people to be more open with you is to show you've done the research. So typically what we'll share with clients is we'll be like, hey, when you get on the call, just say, I've done some research on your website and on your LinkedIn, and I just want to share that with you before we even start the call. And they're like, all right, like, what do you got? And so you'll be like, hey, I went to the website and noticed that you are targeting IT leaders and security leaders. And so you're in that space. We've actually worked with a couple of clients in that space. So we'll talk about that on the call. Number 2 is I see you have a couple case studies in mid-market and enterprise. We've also worked with companies that are targeting those industries as well. So we'll discuss that. I've also noticed that you're hiring a good amount of marketers. We work with a lot of marketing teams, so happy to talk about how we help as you onboard those individuals. And I also noticed that you're 3 months into your role, so you probably have a lot of exciting projects that you're looking to implement. So I just want to make sure, is all that accurate before we move forward? Now, what that's done is now you're like, okay, this is a pattern interrupt, because most reps just don't do that. Now, as a buyer, you don't have to give them the background on your company, which gets boring after a while. You're like, all right, I got to give another backstory that I don't really want to do. And now you are going to be more open with this person because they're like, wow, in the first 10 seconds, they just displayed knowledge about my company that they went out and did. this buying experience is probably going to be different. And ultimately, my last point is that we have to think about the entire sales process as an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we create a great experience for the buyer so it's easier for them to ask us questions, it's easier for them to buy, it's easier for them to move the next steps. The more complicated we make it, the more friction that we have, that's what leads to closed deals and people going dark on you.
Yeah, that oiling of the wheels to make it easier, really, really important. So research and prep and then repeat them. I guess that's what I'm hearing there. Declan, any other tactics that your team have found to be effective?
Sure. Yeah. And just to let Morgan know, I just contacted my legal team. I've trademarked it.
Good.
And just to make sure I get all royalties.
Yeah, take it all.
All royalties will flow back to Dublin. Yeah. Look, in terms of building trust, one thing that we have found worked very well is when we know that digital now, email, social is getting saturated, but we also know that people out there, customers, are real life people. They're juggling a lot. There's the emotional toll of the pandemic. There's the practical toll of the pandemic of managing work and life and kids and everything else. So at a human level, what you have to probably do is make it easier for them. Do the heavy lifting for them. So what we would say is, rather than saying, here's this big, long 7-page report that's a wall of text, we'd say, well, I've looked at it and pages 3 and 6 are really relevant to you because this is what they say are the big trends in your industry, and I think they apply to you. Now, we've actually had customers thank us for that approach because it kind of said you took the effort away and you went that last mile that very few vendors do. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things we have found is a good tactic for the customer. And we use LinkedIn voice notes or video or email to synopsize it and summarize it. So I would say, do some of the heavy lifting for customers because they're under a lot of strain right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing the work and simplification. I think we've all been there, haven't we? When someone's written you an email that takes pages and pages and you almost want to delete it before you've even got past the first few lines. But if someone's bulleted it for you, just giving you the highlights, it really does help you to process and move things through faster. I like that one a lot. Natalie, salespeople's roles in the buying process, do you think they've changed? Do you think buyers really do have different needs and expectations today?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So on both, what Morgan and Declan have spoken about in terms of trust and credibility. And I think, Becky, you referred to this. So the stat that we like to quote is, I think 90% of our buyers rated trust as the most important factor above ROI, above price in closing a deal. So this is huge, and cannot be understated how important it is to build that trust and build that credibility. And I love the credibility call, Declan. That's a great term. So absolutely. So I do think that the sort of the nature of sales has changed, and therefore the role of salespeople really is to become that trusted advisor and build that foundational trust relationship before you even start selling. And amongst all of the tactics that Declan and Morgan described all work great. Video absolutely works great. By the way, if you're not using Smart Links already, Smart Links is a great way to send video because it sort of tracks and shows you who's watched your video, and that's always good to know because then you can be like, okay, well, here are the people that this was forwarded to, so I know that that this is sort of like the people in my buying circle that know who I am now, and video always works better. The other thing that we've actually noticed, even just within our own LinkedIn sales reps, is reps who engage with their buyers just outside of the sales process. Again, just building relationship, building credibility, sharing insights, sharing research, just sharing domain expertise in whatever their domain is, have significantly higher win rates, like 30 to 40% higher win rates, just being out there and talking about their industry, talking about their and just sharing knowledge freely with their buyers and just with customers in general. So that's also super important. Is this is again not necessarily around sales, but just being a domain expert and being recognized as a domain expert and building that credibility. And you can do that, of course, on social media, on LinkedIn, by sharing research reports, doing some of that extra work. So absolutely, the role of sales, I think, is changing. changing. It's much more well-rounded and holistic trust partner, as opposed to someone who's out there just doing a transaction.
Thank you, Natalie. So to be fair, what I'm hearing from all of you is that it's about investment. It's about investment, it's about preparation, it's about research, it's about value. And it's about using everything that's out there for salespeople to become even more relevant to the buyers, to the customers that they are trying to sell to. So the whole piece on relationship building, our teams need to invest, they need to plan, and they need to be ready. Okay, so actually that's all we have time for today. A huge thank you to every single one of you that's tuned in to listen. We hope you found this discussion useful and that it's given you a better understanding of the current outlook for the sales industry. You can let us know what you thought about today's discussion by completing a short survey that will pop up after the broadcast. But before we go, I'd like to say a really, really big thank you to Natalie, Morgan and Declan for sharing their insights with us today. From all of us here, we hope you stay safe and we look forward to seeing all of you for our next webinar.